afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with the executive committee meeting for today. All right, first thing on the agenda is Lafayette High School Transportation Cooperative Initiative, PT2PS. Dr. Aguilar.
Mr. Knezik, Ms. Morris, I'd like to introduce Ms. Rachel Gudo with the Acadiana Planning Commission. We've been working these past several months on an initiative to provide transportation for out-of-zone Lafayette High students to through the Lafayette transit system and try to provide another option to satellite transportation. And they're going to give you a quick overview of that pilot we're working on.
Sorry.
There we go.
There we go.
I'm Rachel Godo, and I'm with the Acadiana Planning Commission, and I have my colleagues here, Deidre Druyette, our communications director, and Mike Oye, our professional planner. And the Acadiana Planning Commission is made up of the 7 parishes within Acadiana: Acadia, Evangeline, Iberia, Lafayette, St. Martin, St. Landry, and Vermilion. And we service the 7 parish area through economic development. We do transportation, which is one of our primary functions through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And in probably 2017, we were awarded what's called the 2040 Regional Transit Study to assess what transit looks like within the next 20 years and how do we improve the current services amongst mass public transit, public fixed transit, and then also transportation needs within each individual parish, one of which was the school systems and the coordination that is here. And we actually just have Mike Mitchell walked in, and he's our transportation, our transit director at Lafayette Transit System, and also been a critical partner throughout this whole process. And basically in January, through the initiative of the 2040 Transit Study, to improve transit coordination, we developed what's called the Transit Talk meetings, which Mr. Craig has been faithfully attending, to really understand the partnerships that we could leverage within the transit world and to assess what kind of challenges maybe exist within bus service, and then potential solutions that we can come up with as a group to leverage the resources that we have available to us. So with that, LPSS was attending some of the meetings and really discussed some of their challenges and maybe the opportunities for partnership with Lafayette Transit System, and how do we improve our transit options for our students and for our parents to provide the support that they need throughout Lafayette Parish. So on April 9th, what we hope to do is test a pre-pilot phase of the coordination that could take place between LPSS and LTS to launch alternative transportation options for one specific high school, which again is just a pilot, but we could deploy this at a much larger level depending on the interest level, depending on the relationships that we leverage. So the focus of this pre-pilot project would be Lafayette High School. And what our hope to do is leverage LTS, which has service available in the morning to transport students. They have security measures that are in place with cameras. We have real-time trackers on the vehicles to, all to enhance the options that parents may have to just, be aware of the safety precautions that LTS takes. So students will be able to essentially ride LTS through this pre-pilot project that begins on April 9th at no cost to the student or the parent. And we've also, in order to encourage parents to buy into this project, is we'll allow them the opportunity to test out the service or ride the service at no cost to them as well. So they can experience the ride for themselves, so they can experience what we're asking their students to participate in. Again, we're not taking any services away. We're hoping to provide alternative options for them, which would give them essentially rides in the morning, rides throughout the day, depending on what time their senior student gets out of school, and also alternative options in the afternoon if there's after-school activities that they have many different options available to them to go home. The target audience for communicating this message at this point in time is going to be 3 routes that are along the for out of school students, with out of zone students, within Lafayette High School, and that's routes 10, 50, and 60. And you'll see here on your map in the blue that it's these routes that are to the right of the map. Those are considered the out of zone students, and those are the routes that are that arrive in time in the morning to be able to pick up the students and bring them to Lafayette High before the bell rings. So the reason why we selected these particular routes was due to the potential ridership, the high concentration of students that that are currently riding, and then 2 is just we understand through communications and conversations that we've had with Dr. Craig is that the cost to transport an out-of-zone student is significantly higher than those that are in zone. So our hope was to provide options and alternatives for parents to be able to transport their students to school, and see if we can leverage the relationships there to ultimately, reduce some of the cost to the school system. We, in these next couple of weeks, will continue to work closely with LPSS and the communications personnel located at the central office and at Lafayette High School. We're in communication with LTS to develop that messaging that is critical to go out to the parents to have them buy in. So that's pretty much the project in a nutshell, and I guess I'll take any questions if you guys have any at this point.
You mentioned the cost that we incur in busing out-of-zone students, but this initiative would result in what cost for the school system?
At this time, we don't have a dollar amount to say this is what it could reduce, because we're just, at this point in time, for the pre-pilot, I'm sorry.
Would the school board have to pay the Lafayette Transit or for the bus passes or any cost like that?
Not at this point in time.
I think this is a great concept. Mr. Santani isn't here tonight, but this is one of the initiatives that he's been trying to, I guess, initiate with LCG on. There is a lot of overlap between existing routes, and it seems that if we modify or add a few routes, that there would be opportunity to service a lot of the out-of-zone kids in the system, because we do have a lot of schools that attract kids from out-of-zone. I was just at David Thibodeau this past week, and they are certainly interested in any type of transportation opportunities that we can provide through something like this. I had a couple questions. So you mentioned the real-time real-time tracking. Are parents or students able to track maybe on a phone where that bus is and when it's going to get to a stop?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's neat. I have a question for staff, and I don't expect that we would know the answer now, but something to think about is with kids, there are often discipline issues on the way to or from school, and I think that we would need to have policies in place that that either start or stop our responsibility for discipline if there's an incident on a bus to and from school. Is that still a school-related incident? Is it not a school-related incident? Is it
that's been our, we actually had that discussion earlier today. So, yeah, I want to actually talk to risk management, but I believe when those students would board an LTS bus and on their way to Lafayette High or the transit hub, that, yeah, their behavior would be held accountable in terms of what the school board expected. It's my understanding they have cameras on the buses so that we could, similar to what we do with LPSS buses, we could monitor behavior and investigate claims. Years ago, when we had CAPS Laps, we also had a similar type of partnership, if I'm not mistaken, where the CAPS and Laps kids would ride a city bus, and even with that group of students, I think there was maybe one incident where behavior was inappropriate on a city bus, and that student lost the privilege to ride the city bus, and that actually, unfortunately, that student became an example, but the other students' behavior improved remarkably because the parents learned to rely on that city bus to get their kids to CAPS Laps. And so they kind of self-corrected themselves, knowing that transportation to the program was on the line.
Good, thank you. I do have a question on, we could tell you right now where most of our transportation challenges are regarding our what we call satellite stops. We have satellite stops throughout the parish
Right.
to transport kids to schools of choice, primarily. What's the timeline regarding the pre-pilot that may be a pilot and then full implementation? I know it depends on the success of the pre-pilot.
Yeah. So my understanding at this point in time, what we've discussed is to move into this pilot, pre-pilot, beginning April 9th, and then we would hope to sometime in August, probably at the beginning of the school year, is launch a full pilot project for Lafayette High School, expanding the route options, and potentially, you know, depending on how the success goes about, you know, we'll be in conversation about when that next, you know, phase of exploring additional schools will come into play. So at this time, we don't have, you know, a definite date, but if my understanding is the success of this pilot in August for Lafayette High School would then allow us to plan for the next phase of, you know, expanding to maybe the other satellite stops.
I think, and this is more directed to staff rather, but
Sure.
one of the issues, in addition to the behavior expectations of the LPSS students, is liability issues. And I'm sure that Ms. Bernard and our attorneys will be getting with their attorneys to look at any hold harmless and indemnity type language. In those events that a student is on a city bus and there's some adverse event that results in litigation, then we have to know who's responsible for that child's claims or injuries. So I'm sure that's something that the attorneys will work out. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm already envisioning ECA transportation, W.D. Smith during the middle of the day. It's an issue getting kids back and forth to the programs. And I would assume at some point that even the middle school kids would be of a sufficient age to make use of the services as well.
Absolutely.
So-
And we don't envision this, and let me just say this, that we don't envision this fixing all the transportation, you know, issues that you guys, or challenges that you may face. Our hope is to plug in the areas that are most critical. That way you can expand your transportation your transportation resources elsewhere.
Great, thank you.
And I would just mention, we're looking at about 109 kids in this initial pre-pilot, and typically this is going to be kids in central Lafayette that are typically zoned for Northside High but want to attend Lafayette, and we're trying to offer them options. But I think Ms. Rachel made it clear we're not taking away satellite transportation as it stands now. We're just looking at options for the future.
And Mr. Craig, how are you letting the kids at Lafayette High School? I'm assuming it's voluntary to participate in the pilot. So what are we doing to tell them
I'm working
about
with Miss Deidre, and we're going to be sending out Remind 101s and an email blast. We have the kids identified in J Campus, and then we'll follow up with a written letter on April 9th, I believe, when we return from the Easter holidays.
Thank you. Next topic on the agenda is a review of sexual harassment policies.
I had asked staff to put all of these together so we could look at them all at once. There are just a couple of holes, I guess, that concerns me. There have been a couple of incidents that have come to my attention, one from a student, one from an employee, and just a couple of things that have been said anecdotally that raise some concerns. So under the sexual harassment policy for employees, it has language in there. The sentence just above the subheading reporting procedure, individuals who believe they've been the victim of sexual harassment should make it clear that such behavior is offensive to them by saying so to the offender. I understand the purpose of that, but if you go through and read the EEOC guidelines or guidances, You will not see this requirement anywhere there or in any state or federal law. There's absolutely no requirement that anybody who is the victim of sexual harassment or sexual bullying or sexual misconduct trigger an investigation or a complaint by turning around and telling the offender, hey, you're offending me. That puts the entire burden on that person who is being the victim or being victimized. So I have some issues. Now, you know, if the language said something more along the lines of we strongly encourage, but when you look at the EEOC guidances on this particular issue, and this is the issue that the EEOC calls unwelcome conduct, this is really a matter of proof once it gets to the court level. It's like, what do you look at to prove that the conduct was welcome or unwelcome? And of course, if somebody says, well, I turned around and told him, that offends me, that is a pretty high level of proof. But if they don't say that, that doesn't mean there's no proof that it was unwelcome. Okay, so I'm afraid that this particular sentence here may be putting a higher burden on our employees, because if they are afraid of bringing it to someone's attention, and it may take a while for students or whoever to talk to their spouses or parents before they gain the courage to make these complaints known, that should not stop the processes from within the system. Okay. My other concern is that under the employee sexual harassment, under reporting procedure, no, it doesn't say it's mandatory necessarily. It says that an employee should file a complaint, and then it says the complaint can be found on the website. I went to look, and yeah, it can be found on the website. It's not very easy to find, but it is there. But the issue with this one is, again, if you look at the EEOC guidelines, there's no requirement that a complaint ever be made in writing, and there's certainly no requirement that it be made in a certain form. But what it says is whether it's written or verbal, as soon as a complaint is made, the employer has an immediate obligation to begin investigating the complaint. Okay, so we have some issues here. Again, we would strongly encourage it to be in writing, but if someone sends an email, or if someone tells one of your administrators and the administrator comes to you, then it may be the administrator who has to say, I had an employee come to me today with a complaint. The employee themselves or the student may not actually put it in writing, and it's not necessarily required before the school system has an obligation to do something. So my concern is that if there is somebody, an employee or a student, who has a complaint, whether it's valid or not, if they make it verbally and then they're being told, well, I never investigated it because you never wrote it down. I don't have to investigate it until you give me a written complaint. We are not in compliance with EEOC if that is the stance that the school system is taking. So I think there are some loopholes in our policies that need to be looked at, and to make sure that the procedures that are being followed when any kind of a complaint is made by a student, teacher, employee, anybody, third party who happens to be on school grounds, we need to make sure that complaints, verbal or not, are being captured and appropriately handled according to the EEOC guidelines. So I guess that was it. Those were the things that kind of came to my mind. I want to make sure we're not boxing ourselves in as a school system by making our requirements significantly more stringent than what's actually required from a state and federal legal standpoint.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I would like to take the sexual harassment policy and refer it to council to make sure it's in line with guidelines from the EEOC.
Yeah, and probably the way it's written, it's probably not far off, but we have to be careful that our policy itself doesn't have a chilling effect on people making complaints. So I think the sentence that I referred to, if you believe you've been the victim, you should tell the person it's offensive, but it may be it may need to be modified slightly to make it clear that this is not mandatory before it's investigated, right? It should just be more of an encouragement. And same with the reporting procedure. You know, we strongly encourage you to report this in writing. We do have a form available, but we will investigate complaints, whether they're verbal or written. Okay. I mean, so there's nothing wrong with encouraging anyone to use a form to make things consistent, but we need to make sure it doesn't appear that that is the only way to do it, and that our investigation is not stopping because that form is not being used. Okay.
All right, ma'am, I'll follow up with.
All right, next topic on the agenda is contract drivers' auto liability insurance.
Yes, sir. I spoke to Miss Bernard today. She does, and Mr. Evans can possibly help me with this, but we do, Miss Bernard does track the mandate and documentation that contract drivers provide for their insurance. She keeps that up to date on a spreadsheet, I believe you see attached. And I really, any questions you'd like to give me that I could entertain?
I will have a question. Ms. Morris.
This may be outside the scope of this particular item, but it's related. I know in the past we've talked about the premiums and that we are subsidizing the increased premium somewhat because we asked for a higher limit. So I guess part of my question is, and if it's not available now, you can of course provide it later, is since we've instituted certain changes in how we've been doing things, one, have the number of accidents decreased sufficiently to in turn result in a lowering of premiums for these contract bus drivers? Are we tracking that
Ms. Morris,
as
I
well?
think that's the next topic on the agenda.
Oh, it's the next agenda item? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Then never mind, I'll wait.
So my question is about, I know we get the certificates. Do we audit? Do we contact it, 2 months after getting the certificate, do we call Berkshire Hathaway and say, hey, does this person have this coverage as reflected on this certificate? The reason I ask for audits is that oftentimes you can change your insurance after you get the certificate. So I want to make sure that the insurance is still in place. So the question is, do we audit? If we don't audit, can we audit?
So my office does not audit. Mr. Evans, do you know if you do, or would that come out of risk management? So I will check with her, and I will get back with you on that answer.
And by audit, I just mean simply calling to verify insurance coverage weeks, months after we get the policy.
Oh, no, I understand. You have it one day, and then a month later you get rid of your coverage, and yeah.
Yes, sir. All right. If there's nothing else on this topic, we can move to the next topic. Related. Automobile liability loss control measures. So the board implemented, over the last 2-3 years, we've implemented several processes to limit our liability with regards to bus accidents. Not only to limit the liability, but increase safety across the board. So we wanted to get a summary of how we're doing on that.
I'm sorry. So we do have safety committee meetings that we meet with periodically, and I don't see Mr. Como. We sit down And in that committee meeting, Damon, myself, Renee, Sherville, it's not just buses, but it's all leadership positions in terms of dealing with staff that may have accidents or claims against the district. And with respect to transportation, we're provided with a list of accidents. We kind of track those on a year-to-year basis in terms of those that are chargeable to us, those are not chargeable to us, the cause. The data is attached with the agenda item, bus accidents. They go up and down. A lot of the accidents aren't necessarily chargeable to the Lafayette Parish school system. If you look at the 2018 data, at this point we're down compared to last year for not chargeable. We're down for chargeable. If you look at 2016 data, 2017 data, there appears to be a decline in the number of accidents our bus drivers are experiencing, but we haven't finalized 2018 data yet. In terms of one of the initiatives of this project has been the 1-800 stickers, and so every
Mr.
school.
Craig, is this calendar year or is this school year?
I believe this would be calendar year.
Okay.
School year, I'm sorry, I apologize, school year.
Well, it says at the top by calendar year, so of that chart. So
I I apologize. Miss Bernard posted this item, so I'm going on. I do apologize for
So
that.
we do think this is calendar year.
As Miss Morris says, yeah, if you look at that top heading by calendar year, so that would be basically 2 months of data.
So if it's calendar year, then we're looking at the first quarter of 2018. So
Yes,
if we
ma'am.
extrapolate that forward, then we're kind of on track with our 2017 numbers. But we still have 3/4 of the year to work on reducing those numbers, Mr. Evans. Okay.
So we do have the stickers that we've placed on all LPSS vehicles, and that call log is attached to that. It's not just buses, it's also maintenance vehicles, in particular maintenance vehicles. Primarily the calls come in on buses. Periodically we get a complimentary call, but typically they are complaints. We get those and then we take a look at what the text is, or we listen to the message, and where possible we try to investigate if the claim is accurate or not. Some of the claims are easily proved or disproved, in particular speed, hard braking. We can kind of look at running the stop signs. Those are pretty easy to look at via our GPS units on all the buses. With the additions of cameras these past 2 months, those will also be able to, we'll be able to look out that front windshield of the vehicle to see if indeed they're not yielding to another driver, or if in fact the other driver is pulling out in front of the bus. The ones that are trickier to identify are, like I just mentioned, when we get the call and says they pulled out in front of me. Well, that's, without looking at the cameras, it's hard to say, did they indeed pull out in front of the other driver, or did the other driver not yield for them, and the bus was going the proper speed and had the right of way, but a car cuts them off. The calls can be subjective, and when you look at the text message or listen to the voicemail, you can kind of hear emotion in their voices, and I understand that, especially in safety situations. But we try to evaluate the calls that we can. Some of them we can't evaluate, or we can't prove or disprove. With the addition of cameras, some of these incidents that happen in front of the bus will be easier to prove. What becomes an issue for transportation staff is, with the cameras that we now have on the buses, on 300 buses, and with the 1-800 numbers, call-ins, it's becoming a manpower issue in terms of reviewing video cards and or checking the GPS units. Actually, checking the GPS units is probably one of our easiest solutions because I can call it up on my computer, Joey, Damon, Charity. We have staff that can easily verify speed. We can verify whether or not a bus stop was skipped or a route was skipped. Some of the others are when you have to start looking at the video cameras. Really, Mr. Evans and Mr. Simon have to go out to the schools and they have to find that bus. They have to pull the card. Joey goes around with a computer and he can read, he can check the camera footage right there, and it starts to become a manpower problem because the cameras are doing a good job of catching inappropriate behavior on the part of drivers and students and sometimes parents. It just takes the time to get out to the schools to pull the card, review the card. We've actually created shared folders with school administrators so that when staff pulls the video footage, we can load the video footage onto a Google folder where the administrators, in particular with student behavior, they can pull up the video, share it with the student, share it with the parent, and take the corrective action. The issues that involve driver behavior or potentially parent behavior, we kind of work through those through my office and transportation. One of the attachments is kind of how we handle complaints, kind of what I was just describing, but written down for you.
I have a question. So on this data, was 2015 really that good of a year, or do we think that it's possible that we didn't capture all of the data?
I would have to ask Ms. Bernard about that. That was really as I was coming in, so I couldn't tell you. Historically, I don't have a context to that. Mr. Evans, do you know?
Historically, we get into about 50 to 70 accidents per year. That particular year was very low. It was I think the second season I was here. Then it kind of spiked up, and we started to take a look at what kind of accidents we were getting into, how many we could actually avoid. That's where the defensive driving, the 800 stickers came into play. And once we actually implemented those particular ones, it's actually been starting as a decline. Pretty much every year across the board, we get into about 10 accidents a year where we get rear-ended, and we usually do 3 to 5 every year where we actually rear-end somebody on some kind of way, shape, or form. But that's pretty historically. That will get between 50 and 70 accidents.
While we have you up here, I have a
Yes, sir.
couple questions. So is this all contract and LPSS employees?
Yes, sir.
This is, okay. So it looks like about half, roughly, of our chargeable accidents come from us hitting fixed objects, parked cars, whether it's forward or backward or sideways. So it looks like whether you sideswipe it back into it or drive into it, we are hitting about half of our accidents are us hitting fixed objects. So I have two questions. How does the driver then, is there a disciplinary or a corrective action process for those drivers who are hitting parked objects? And then what else can we do to prevent that?
There's definitely a process. You know, the first accident, everybody can get in an accident. Me, you, anybody in this room. And it's something that you know, we take a look at it and say this is what happened. We go over every single thing, especially in a charged accident. If it's an uncharged accident, there's nothing we could do. We couldn't avoid it. If it's a repeat offender, and it's a second accident or a third accident, we actually go with written documentation, retraining, and defensive driving. And I've actually got one of my drivers actually in the particular program. You know, we get them back to training. They go through the program again, and once they've gone through that program, when they come out of it, they know that that's their last attempt. That we're actually going to try and make them a better driver. And if we can't, if it's on them, then we have to separate them from the program.
Have we noticed any trends or any particular cause and why this is happening? Is it maybe it's narrow streets? Is it the routes that we pick? Is it the time of day? Anything like that at all?
During the time that we're actually on the streets, everybody else is on the streets as well. You know, they're actually going to work at 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're going home at 4 o'clock in the afternoons. It's higher congestion on most streets. A lot of accidents are backing up into something or tail swinging, you know, into another vehicle. You know, and sometimes there's an actual accident that actually occurs. Driver doesn't even realize it because they just hit a mirror of somebody. Now we take all of that into account, and if it's something minor, we still use it as an accident. If there was a big truck coming down the road in an opposite direction and both of our mirrors hit, that's still an accident. It's not at fault, but we still charge it as an accident, and we take a look at it. But what we've been doing is we've notified and seen exactly where we are messing up on our side, and trying to get everybody into some specialization areas where a professional comes in and actually gives them some different training for all of our drivers.
Ms. Morris.
Mr. Evans, while you're up, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
One, how are we doing on filling our bus driver slots or substitute driver slots?
We actually are recruiting many drivers in. And that's a pretty sore spot for us right now, because some of those are getting into small accidents. That's the part of our retraining on everybody. We've brought them in so quickly that I feel that they need a little bit more training. So those are the candidates that are getting more training. We find that our older drivers are much more safe. They know the roads, they know where they're going, they know where their kids are, and they get into far less accidents. And that's our focus right now. It's all of our new training. You know, get back in defensive driving again as well.
I know at the beginning of the year there was a pretty big effort on recruiting for bus drivers and subs. I've seen the signs at some of the schools to apply.
Yep.
So you've been able to fill those slots pretty well.
Yeah, we actually the internship that we actually opened up. Our first recruits, they had four that was in there. All 4 have gotten their licenses. They're on routes. We've put them in. I've got 3 more people that I'm about to start filling the slots. It's actually workforce. We're recruiting everywhere and anywhere.
Okay, my next question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I have to say that probably the most I get in the way of communications from constituents are, I called the transportation office and left a message and nobody's returned my call. So how is your department handling? I understand in the past, because of empty slots, you and your office staff would often leave the office to go drive. So with the recruiting efforts, has it improved so that somebody was remaining in the transportation office? And do you know, or do you track what kind of turnaround time there is in returning calls that are left for you?
Yes, ma'am. We still have some staff actually driving. It has filled a lot of slots that we have, but we've had retirements and everything as normal. People moving, people quitting, you know, going to different jobs as well. We've had to, as we get them in, we're filling slots, and it's right now it's kind of an even keel. You know, we might lose one to surgery for eight months, and we get one come in, and it's kind of a wash across the board. We do have some staff still actually driving. The addition to the cameras, like Mr. Craig said, it is putting a bit of a strain on me and Joey in our particular spots, because we're the ones that are entrusted with all the videos, and we want to keep that chain of evidence as close as possible. So that's why we're doing it, and not assigning it to somebody else in the office.
Okay, and I appreciate all that information, but I'm not sure you quite got maybe maybe it was a bad question. So when people call in and leave messages that, you know, the bus was late or the bus didn't stop at my stop or whatever the issue is, how are those calls, those messages being handled? How quick does your staff get back to those callers? Because that really is probably the most common issue, and I usually refer them to Mr. Craig when I get them. So I'm sure he would appreciate not getting those from me. But it's usually, you know, whatever. My kid wasn't picked up twice last week. I called transportation, left 3 messages. Nobody's ever called me back. Something like that.
We do get those complaints. Mr. Joe gets them as well. Both the receptionist and the secretary in a particular department, they actually look at all the voice messages every other day, just to make absolutely sure they're going through the whole entire system. If they've skipped something, they actually normally put it in an issue track. If it's a serious, or if it's just a callback, they'll send an email to either me, Charity, or Joe in my office. And we tend to, every time it comes in, like this morning, I had 8 calls. By about 1 o'clock, I was completely done with it because I had to go to a meeting. But all of those 8 calls that I knew about actually got recalled. If it's something that the receptionist or secretary can handle, if it's something like the bus driver was 10 minutes late or something like that, they can pull it up on GPS, right then and there. There is people that answer the phones. Sometimes we're not getting calls into our particular department. They are calling other different departments, and it's just not getting to us. But anything that actually calls into ours, we are trucking all the voicemails if we didn't answer the call live.
That's all I have. Anyone else got anything on this? All right. Thank you. That's all the business for today, so the meeting is adjourned.